Hello, good morning everyone. We're Group 1 and we will tackle about the self according to philosophy.
So philosophy is defined from the Latin roots philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. Philosophy is the study of general and fundamental questions, such as those about reasons, existence, knowledge, values, minds, and language. So mag start po tayo kay Socrates. Socrates is a philosopher from Athens, Greece, and said to have the greatest influence on European thoughts. According to the history, he was not able to write any of his teachings and life's account. Instead, he is known from the writings of his student, which is si Plato, na isa na din sa greatest philosopher at that time. So si Socrates ay may unique style of asking questions na tinatawag na Socratic method. Socratic method or dialect method involves the search for the correct or proper definition of a thing. Dito sa method na ito, hindi nagle-lecture si Socrates, instead nagtatanong siyang different questions para ma-engage yung person sa discussion. Kumbaga uma-acting siya na hindi niya alam yung isang bagay na tinatanong niya para mag-interact or magkaroon ng iba't ibang idea yung iba't ibang tao na tinuturuan niya. Next slide po. According to Socrates, self is dichotomous, which means composed of two things, the physical realm and the ideal realm. Physical realm is changeable, temporal, and imperfect. Ito yung mga nakikita natin, nasa-sense, naaamoy, nafe-feel, naririnig, at nalalasahan. Lagi itong nagbabago. Example ay music, food, feelings, and everything we see. So, ang ideal realm naman ay imperfect and unchanging, eternal and immortal. These include intellectual essences of the universe like the concept of beauty, truth, and goodness. So, hindi siya nagbabago. Next slide po. For Socrates, human is composed of body and soul. The first belong to physical realm because it changed, it is imperfect and dies, and the latter belongs to ideal realm for it survived the death. For these phrases naman po, according to Socrates, human is composed of body and soul. For the first one is the body which is belong to physical realm because ito po ay nagbabago or nagbago. For the second naman po is human is composed of soul and this belong to ideal realm because it survives. So we can prove that Socrates is right because ang katawan po or ang body ay nag-iiba, nagiging abo or lumilipas. While ang soul naman po ay ideal realm kasi ito po ay eternal. Self-immortal and unified entity that consistent over time. The self dito naman po yung sarili mo po, yung simula pagkabata o hanggang tumanda ka, ikaw pa din yan, walang nagbabago. Kahit na nagkaroon ka ng changes or pagbabago sa physical appearance or nagparitoke ka or what, ikaw pa din yan, sarili mo pa din yan. Kaya according to Socrates, self is immortal and walang kamatayan. Next po. So according kay Socrates, I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. So yun nga, dun sa Socratic method, hindi niya mismo binibigay yung exact na answer sa tanong niya, kundi parang pinapagana niya yung critical thinking ng isang tao hanggang sa makapag-isip siya ng makapag-isip ng idea, mapalawak yung isip niya, at sa ganun ay maging interactive yung isang discussion. Yun lang po, thank you.
We'll now tackle about Plato. Plato elaborates his concepts of the soul by introducing the idea of a three-part soul or self by by the reason, physical appetite, and spirit or passion inconsistently. So, next slide po. So, one, the reason enables human to think deeply, make wise choices, and achieve a true understanding of eternal truths. So, magbibigay po ako ng isang situation about sa the reason na kung saan pasok din yung physical appetite and spirit or passion. So, sa relasyong magjowa, given na situation doon na nag-cheat yung boy sa girl, dito pumapasok yung enables us to think deeply na kung saan, kung bibigyan ba ulit ng chance nung girl, yung boy, or hindi na. So, next is pumapasok na din yung sa make wise choices na dapat pinag-iisipan muna ng mabuti bago gumawa ng isang bagay. So, yung understanding or achieving a true understanding of eternal truths, like nabibigyan ng kasagutan yung mga what ifs and kung bakit nangyari yon. So, next is the physical appetite is the basic biological needs of human being such as hunger, thirst, and sexual desire. So, yon, self-explanatory na din naman yan. Alam na naman natin yung biological needs of human being such as hunger, thirst, and sexual desire nga. And last, for the concept of Plato, um, the spirit or passion is the basic emotions of human being, such as love, anger, ambition, aggressiveness, and empathy. So, hindi ka naman matatawag na human being kung wala kang emotions kasi robot lang naman yung walang emotions. So, next po. Um, Plato also illustrated his view of the solar self in Phaedrus in his metaphor. So, gaya dito sa in-illustrate ni Plato sa Phaedrus, the soul is linked to a chariot drawn by two powerful winged horses, tapos a noble horse representing spirit and a wild horse embodying appetite. So, these those charioteers who are successful in setting a true course and ensuring that the two steeds work together in harmonious unity achieve true wisdom and banquet with gods. Yun lang yung sa akin.
Next is Saint Augustine. He is considered as the last of the great ancient philosophers whose ideas were greatly Platonic. When we say Platonic or intimate or affectionate, sa inmelding o pagsamasamahin ang mga philosophy and religion beliefs together. Augustine has been characterized as Christianity's first theologian. Ang theologian ay ang tawag sa isang tao na eksperto sa theology like sa mga biblical studies, church history, study of God, and religion. Uh, like Plato, Augustine believed that the physical body is different from the immortal soul. Tapos, early in his philosophical development, he described body as snare or yung ang snare yung isang trap for catching animals. Also, he described that body as a cage or yung kulungan ng soul. And he also said that the body is a slave or alipin ng ating kaluluwa. And he even characterized the soul makes war with our body. And later on, he came to the view that body as a spouse or yung asawa ng ating kaluluwa and with both attached to one another by a natural appetite. Ibig sabihin nito ay yung tulad ng mag-asawa, they have a natural desire to satisfy a bodily need. He concluded that the body is united with the soul so that man may be entire, complete, is a fact we recognize on the evidence of our own nature. He also stated that real happiness can only be found in God. Ang ginawa ng God ang tao para magmahalan din. Problems arise because of the object humans choose to love. It's said here that the disordered love results when man loves. When 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 we say disordered love is, for example, if your best friend tells you something and you blab it at a dinner party, you're putting your love of popularity above your love of friendship, which he believes it will give him or her a happiness. Furthermore, he said that if man loves God first and everything to a lesser degree, then all will fall into its rightful place. According to Saint Augustine, the human nature is composed of two realms. First is the God as the source of all reality and truth. Second is the sinfulness of man. First, God as the source of all reality and truth, meaning through mystical experience man is capable of knowing external truths. And sabi niya rin na without God as the source of all truth, ang isang tao ay hindi naintindihan ang eternal truth. Sabi ay, this relationship with God means that kung sinong nakakakilala kay God ay mas malapit na naintindihan ang true nature of the world. Next is the sinfulness of man. The cause of sin or evil, kaya tinawag na evil, syempre dahil ang pagkakaroon ng kasalanan ng tao ay matatawag na evil. Ito ay ang act of man free will o kagustuhan of moral goodness can only be achieved through the grace of God. The role of God, Saint Augustine explains that first, love of physical objects leads to the sin of greed. Ibig sabihin, yung kagustuhan ng isang tao para sa isang bagay o yung desire niya ay mag-lead sa kasalanan na gustong-gusto mong makuha, yung selfish desire, it could be power or food. Second is love. Love for other people is not lasting and excessive love for them is the sin of jealousy. Meaning, a person who loves someone is not lasting or able to endure over a long period of time. But an excessive love or desirable love uh, put them is the sin of jealousy. Third is love for the self leads to the sin of pride. Ang pagmamahal sa sarili can lead to the sin of pride or pride as a consciousness of one's own dignity. Next and last is love for God is the supreme virtue and only through loving God can man find real happiness. Ang pagmamahal sa Panginoon ay hindi supreme virtue on its yung don't expect too much or not trying to control or its freedom from all our desires. And sa pamamagitan ng pagmamahal kay Lord can find a real happiness. Yun lang po.
Next is René Descartes. René Descartes was born in small town, central France called La Haye-Touraine on March 31, 1596. Descartes, known as a French philosopher, mathematician, and founder of modern philosophy. He was died on February 11, 1650 at Sweden, Stockholm. Next po. Descartes' view of human nature. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am or I exist. Established the philosophical view of knowledge and concept of oneself. Cogito ergo sum. This saying was first seen in his work, The Discourse of the Method of Rightly Conducting One Reason and of Seeking Truth in the Science, published on 1637. And it became as a first step in demonstrating the attainability of certain knowledge. René Descartes began to ask question, what I am. The self is a dynamic entity in mental operations. He declared the essential self or the self as a thinking entity, thinking a thing. In this world of uncertainty and doubts, our thing is sure na pinag-iisipang mabuti ang mga bagay-bagay na gagawin. Because even if any entity were to try to deceive him into thinking that he exists when he does not, he would have to exist in order for that entity, even though no matter what unreliable proves that Descartes exists in a thinking a thing. He also maintained that the soul and body are independent of one another and each can exist and function without the other. He identified the physical self as a part of nature. It perhaps not as shallow as one might initially has pursued. This is truly captured something in him. In the task of philosophy, so sa makatuwid, it signals a commitment to work on through our emotional confusion in order to arrive in an independent, rationally founded understanding of oneself. Descartes discovered the concept of dualism. The human self is composed of two distinct entities, the mind and body. The mind and the body are different and opposite. The mind houses our understanding, intellect, and passion, while in the body, just a shape that has different sizes and showcase motion. Bodies do not understand, and do not have sizes, shape, and even movements. In order to attain the best decision in life, is always have a healthy mind. Clear mind and thoughts will give a good outcomes. Most of the bad and wrong do happen in the world is caused by the misusing of the mind. Yun lang po.
Saglit lang, papatayin ko lang ang mic ko.
So next is John Locke. He is an English philosopher and physician. He is famous in his concept of tabula rasa or blank state that assumes the nurture side of human development. So this tabula rasa that popularized by John Locke means that the human minds receive knowledge and forms itself based on the experience alone. It also implies that individual human beings are born blank with no built-in mental content, that their identity is defined entirely by their experiences and sensory perceptions of the outside world. So example po yung stock knowledge na meron tayo. So bakit nga ba tayo nagkakaroon ng stock knowledge? So nakukuha po natin yan sa experiences natin because we already tackle some information about that. Next is, for Locke, self is consciousness, not on substance nor on soul. In Locke's mind, conscious awareness and memory of previous experiences are the keys to understanding the self. In other words, we have a coherent concept of ourselves as a personal identity because we are aware of ourselves when we are thinking, feeling. Best example po dyan ay yung reincarnation na tinatawag na iniisip natin na nabuhay po tayo noon sa nakaraan na na-reincarnate lang ulit tayo ngayon sa panahon or sa generation natin. So for Locke, the body may change, but the person remains the same. In his essay entitled Personal Identity, he discussed the reflective analysis of how an individual may experience in everyday living. He provided the following key points. First, discover the nature of personal identity. It is important to find out what it means to be a person.
So, sinasabi po dito is discovering our personal identity. Na habang tumatanda po tayo, mas lumalawak yung isipan natin sa mga bagay-bagay. Mas nag improve tayo as a person, tsaka mas nalalaman natin at nafi-figure out why we exist in this world. Number two is a person is a thinking, intelligent, who has the abilities to reason and to reflect. So it means we, as a human being, has the ability to think and to reflect based on the people and the environment around us. So yung mga personality natin, kung paano tayo mag-isip is nakukuha natin sa mga taong nakapaligid sa atin. May ability tayo to think because of our consciousness. Number three, a person is also someone who considers themselves to be the same thing in different times and different places. Yes, that's right. Kapag po nakaka-relate tayo sa isang tao, iniisip natin na ay parehas kami ng pinagdaanan ng tao na to. We are comparing ourselves to that person because we already experiences the same thing in the different times and places. Number four, consciousness as being aware that we are thinking always accompanies thinking and is an essential part of the thinking process. So it means that consciousness is the fact of awareness by the mind of itself and the world. Being aware about yourself and the world around you is very important to be able to think wisely and make the right decisions. Number five, consciousness makes possible our belief that we are the same identity in different times and different places. Yes, because of our consciousness, we believe that some persons have the same belief just like us. It is also based on the persons who have the same concern, interest, and beliefs. Example po, yung mga friends natin, kadalasan kaya natin sila nagiging friends kasi we have the same vibes and the same interest. Kaya nagkakasundo tayo. Kaya importante po talaga that we know ourselves. Last, Locke was not convinced with the assumption of Plato, St. Augustine, and Descartes that the individual self necessarily exists in a single soul or substance. Like I said a while ago, Locke believed that self is consciousness. For him, body or substance is only exist in other times and places of the memory of those experiences. That's all po.
Next po is yung kay David Hume. David Hume, he was a Scottish philosopher and also an empiricist, generally regarded as one of the most important philosophers to write in English. David Hume, born in Edinburgh, Hume spent his childhood at Ninewells, his family's modest estate in the border lowlands. He came from a good family, socially well-connected but not wealthy. His father died just after David's second birthday, leaving him and his elder brother and sister in the care of their mother. He was born on April 26, 1711, and died August 25, 1776. Hume was diagnosed with intestinal cancer before his death in 1776. David Hume claim about self is quite controversial because he assumed that there is no self. In his essay entitled On Personal Identity, 1739, he said that if we carefully examine the content of our experience, we find that there are only two distinct impressions and ideas. So according to Hume's, if we carefully examine the contents of our experience, we find that there are only two distinct entities, which are impressions and ideas. So impressions are the basic sensation of our experience, the elemental data of our minds. Pain, pleasure, heat, cold, happiness, grief, fear, exhilaration, and so on. These impressions are lively and vivid, while ideas are copies of impressions and as a result they are less lively and vivid. Ideas include thoughts and images that are built up from our primary impressions through a variety of relationships. But because they are derivative copies of impressions, they are once removed from reality. If we examine this basic data of our experience, we see that they form a fleeting stream of sensations in our mind, and that nowhere among them is sensation of a constant and invariable self that exists as a unified identity over the course of our lives. Impressions are the basic sensation of our experience, the elemental data of our minds, pain, pleasure, heat, cold, happiness, grief, fear, and exhilaration, and so on. Next slide po. On other hand, ideas are copies of impressions that includes thoughts and images that are built up from our primary impressions through a variety of relationships. But because they are derivative copies of impressions, they are once removed from reality. So, if we examine this basic data of our experience, we see that they form fleeting stream of sensation in our mind, and that nowhere among them is the sensation of constant and invariable. We can only conclude that there is no good reason for believing that self is exist. So this is David Hume goes on the explanation. I can never catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. Even we actively look for the self, Hume contends we simply can't find it. All of our experience are perception, and none of these perceptions resemble a unified and permanent self identity that exists over time. Hume considered that the self does not exist because of all the experience that a person may have are just perceptions, and this includes the perception of self. None of these perceptions resemble a unified and permanent self identity that exists over time. So, from David Hume's perspective, this astonishing belief is the only possible conclusion consistent with an honest and objective examination of our experience. David Hume further added that there are instances that an individual is limited in an experiencing their perception like in sleeping. Similarly, when someone died, all empirical senses and according to him. It make no it make no sense to believe that self exists in other forms. As an empiricist, Hume provide an honest description and analysis of his own experience, within which there is no self to be found. So furthermore, when we are not experiencing our perceptions, as when we sleep, there is no reason to suppose that our self exists in any form. Similarly, when our body dies and all empirical sensations cease, it makes no sense to believe that our self continues to exist in some form that is final. Next slide po. So, yung picture po pala, yun po yung sinulat niya sa personal identity po. Hume explained that the self that is being experienced by an individual is nothing but a kind of fictional self. Human created an imaginary creature which is not real. Fictional self is created to unify the mental events and introduce order into an individual lives, but this self has no real existence. So David Hume argues that our concept of the self is a result of our natural habit of attributing unified existence to any collection of associated parts. This belief is natural, but there is no logical support for it. Wait lang. Hume explained that the self is being experienced by an individual is nothing but a kind of fictional self. Human created an imaginary creature which is not real. So the self cannot be an impression as there is no constant impressions or experience that could lead to our idea of self. The self cannot be an idea because ideas are formed from impressions which are unstable and changing. Therefore, there is no possible true understanding of the self. Okay na po.
Good morning po. Sigmund Freud. He was born on May 6, 1856, a well-known Australian psychologist and considered as the father and founder of psychoanalysis. He was born to Galician Jewish parents in the Moravian town of Freiburg, in the Austrian Empire. He qualified as a Doctor of Medicine in 1881 at the University of Vienna, having set up his clinical practice there in 1886. Became an affiliated professor in 1902. So, hindi lang siya psychologist, isa din siyang professor. The dualistic view of self by Freud involved the conscious self and the unconscious self. He died on September 23, 1939. So, yung isa sa mga theories niya is yung psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is defined as a set of psychological theories and therapeutic methods. Yung primary assumption ng psychoanalysis is the belief that all people possess unconscious thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories. Psychoanalytic theory states that the unconscious forces act to determine personality and behavior. Thoughts and behaviors arise from stress produced by unconscious motive and unresolved childhood conflicts, defense mechanism, anxiety. So, yung psychoanalysis is therapy siya para mawala yung mga pinipigilan natin na emotions at experience natin para yung unconscious ay maging conscious. Dito kasi yung ginagawa ni Sigmund Freud, pinapahiga niya yung patient niya tapos hinahayaan niya lang na magkwento ng tungkol sa mga past experience niya para yung person na yon is ma-heal dun sa mga masasamang experience niya. So, eto. Freud linked the three levels of mind to an iceberg. So, yan nakikita nyo sa picture. The top of the iceberg that you can see above the water represents the conscious mind. The part of the iceberg that is submerged below the water but is still visible is the preconscious. The bulk of the iceberg that lies unseen beneath the waterline represent the unconscious. The conscious self is governed by reality principle. Here, the self is rational, practical, and appropriate to the social environment. The conscious self has the task of controlling the constant pressure of the unconscious self as its primitive impulses continually seek for immediate discharge. Dito, yung conscious mind, yun yung nilalaman ng ating thoughts, memories, feelings, na aware tayo at the moment of time. At once na may magtanong sa atin, madali lang natin siyang masasabi. Masasabi kasi iniisip na nga natin siya at the moment. Well, the preconscious consists of anything that could potentially be brought in the conscious mind. So yung last naman, the unconscious mind, is a reservoir of feelings, thoughts, and memories that are outside of our conscious awareness. The conscious contains contents that are unacceptable or unpleasant, such as feelings of pain, anxiety, or conflict. So dito naman sa unconscious mind, yun yung mga kinakalimutan na natin na feelings, tinatago natin na memories, na maaaring masakit and nakakahiya, kaya pilit na nating inaalis sa ating isip and make it unconscious. Subconscious serves as the repository of past experiences, repressed memories, fantasies, and urge. The three levels of the mind are, first, the ID. This is primarily based on the pleasure principle. So dito, yun yung meeting basic needs. It is the most basic part of the personality. It also represents our most animalistic urges, like the desire for food and sex. The ID seeks instant gratification for for our wants and needs. If these needs or wants are not met, a person can become tense, anxious, or eager. So yung example dito, kunwari may gusto tayo, hindi natin iniisip yung magiging result ng action natin, basta na lang natin siya ginagawa. Hindi natin iniisip yung magiging effect nun sa ibang tao kasi once na hindi natin yung nagawa, may tendency na magalit tayo. Second is the ego. The structure that is primarily based on the reality principle. Ito naman yung dealing with reality. The ego deals with reality, trying to meet the desire of the ID in a way that is socially acceptable in the world. Ito naman yung sinusunod pa rin natin yung gusto natin, pero iniisip natin kung acceptable ba siya sa ibang tao, kung ano yung magiging effect nito sa kanila. This may mean delaying gratification and helping to rid of the tension that ID feels if a desire is not met right away. The ego recognizes that other people have needs and wants too, and being selfish isn't good in the long run. So yun nga, hindi lang sarili natin yung iniisip natin, kundi yung ibang tao din. Third is the superego. This is primarily dependent on learning the difference between right and wrong. Thus, it is called moral principle. So dito, ito yung adding morals. The superego develops last and is based on morals and judgments about right and wrong. Even though the superego and the ego may reach the same decision about something, the superego, nagbe-base yung decision natin dun sa mga moral values, while the ego's decision is based more on what others will think or what consequence of an action could be on the individual. And last, also according to Freud, there are two kinds of instinct that drive individual behavior, the eros or the life instinct and the thanatos of death instinct. The energy of eros is called libido and includes urge necessary for an individual and species survival like thirst, hunger, and sex in a case that human behavior is directed toward destruction in the form of aggression and violence such as the manifestation of thanatos. So yun lang po. Thank you po.
Next po is Gilbert Ryle. Gilbert Ryle is a British analytical philosopher. He was an important figure in the field of linguistic analysis, which focused on the solving of philosophical puzzles through an analysis of language. Gilbert Ryle was born in Brighton, Sussex, England on August 19. One of the 10 children, he came from a prosperous family and enjoyed a liberal, stimulating childhood and adolescence. His father was a general practitioner, but had keen interest in philosophy and astronomy that he passed on to his children, and an impressive library were Ryle enjoying, being an omnivorous reader. Ryle educated at Brighton College, where later in life he would return as a governor. Ryle went to Queen's College, Oxford in 1919, initially to study classics, but he was quickly drawn to philosophy, graduating in 1924 with first-class honors in the New Modern Grades School of Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. According to Ryle, the self is the best understood as a pattern of behavior, the tendency or disposition for a person to behave in a certain way in certain circumstances. So, from Gilbert Ryle's perspective, the self is the best understood as a pattern of behavior, the tendency or disposition for a person to behave in a certain way in certain circumstances. He opposed the notable ideas of the previous philosophers and even claimed that those were result of confused conceptual thinking he termed category mistake. So Gilbert Ryle said that the category mistake happens when we speak about the self as something independent of the physical body, a purely mentally entity existing in time but not space. Okay na po.
Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher who made a great contribution to the fields of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Kant is widely regarded as the greatest philosopher of the modern period. He was born on April 22, 724, and he was died on February 12, 1804. He witnessed the American and the French Revolution, grew up during Enlightenment period and the relationship with a personal with the God. Kant was exposed to many new ideas of the Enlightenment period, such as the rationalism and empirical data. His family were his family were pietists, believe in a personal devotion and Bible reading. Next slide po. He wrote three books. The first one is The Critic of Pure Reason. The main goal of this was to distinguish between the knowledge that you have already and the knowledge you acquire. It is focused on the debate between the predestination and the free will. The second book is The Critic of Practical Reason. It is the moral objective and cannot be united with moral virtue. It is focused on free will through freedom. The third critic is the critic of practical reason. It says that judgment is a universal power and everyone is bound to it. Next slide po. Kant's view of mind. Kant argued that mind is not just a passive receiver of sense experiences, but rather actively participate in knowing the object it experiences. In addition, Kant stated that instead of the mind conforming to the world, it is the external world that conforms to the mind. And instead of disregarding the philosophies of rationalism, he combined them and defined knowledge as a result of human understanding applied to sense experience. Next slide po. The first one is Kant held those bundles of sensory impressions imply a unity of the self without which there would be no knowledge of experience. It means that to establish that the collection of impressions and different content is what it only takes to define a person. And also, it is the awareness of the different emotions that we have, impressions, and behavior is only part of ourself. And to fully understand the self, a certain level of consciousness or sense that chooses our intuition, which synthesizes all the experiences, the impressions, and the perceptions of ourselves, will pave the way to define and how who we really are. The second one is when the self sees an object, it tends to remember its characteristics and applies on it the form of time and space. For example, the time of time, the idea of time and space, we may not be able to observe the movement of time and the vastness of space, but we are really still capable of understanding their concept based from we can observe as their representation. The third one is the term he used for this experience of the self and its unity with objects is transcendental apperception. For Kant, he explained that the transcendental is used because people do not experience the self directly, but as a unity of all our impressions that are organized by the mind through perceptions. And for me, the transcendental apperception is an essence of our consciousness and establishing the notion of self by synthesizing one's accumulation of experiences, intuition, and imagination. For the overall, the idea of self are not only an object that perceives and reacts to whatever it is that we are experiencing. We also have the capabilities to understand
beyond those experiences and able to think and have a clear identification who we really and establish a sense of self that is unique and distinguished from others. Next reporter po.
Next po, Paul and Patricia Churchland. Paul and Patricia Churchland. Paul Churchland, born on October 21, 1942 in Vancouver, Canada, and Patricia Smith Churchland, born on July 16, 1943 in Oliver, British Columbia, Canada. They are both Canadian-American philosophers whose work has focused on integrating the disciplines of philosophy of mind and neuroscience in a new approach that has been called neurophilosophy. They are also central figures in the philosophical stance known as eliminative materialism, an American philosopher interested in the fields of philosophy of mind, philosophy of science, cognitive, neurobiology, epistemology, and perception. Churchland's central argument is that concept and theoretical vocabulary that people use to think about themselves. So, gamit ang mga term na tulad ng belief, desire, fear, sensation, pain, joy, na tunay na daw na maling paglalarawan sa katotohanan ng mga isip at sarili ng isang tao. And inaako niya na ang sarili ay isang produkto lamang ng activity ng ating utak. Next po. The self as the brain according to the Paul Churchland. This lesson po, we will explain Paul Churchland theories about the mind and the brain. In doing so it will highlight dualism and materialism as well as eliminative materialism. Next na nga sa dualism. Dualism. Why do people say read my mind instead of read my brain? Along the same lines, why is it brain surgery instead of mind surgery? So bakit nga ba? Interestingly, we can find an answer in today's lesson as we explore the works of Paul Churchland, specifically his theories on self and the brain. Since si Churchland daw po ay isang modern day philosopher na nag-aaral about sa mga utak, let's first take a look at some older philosophical theories on the subject. For much of history, maraming mga philosophers sa Western ang umahawak sa teorya ng dualism. Pagdating sa pagtatalakay sa buhay ng isang tao, ang dualism ay ang ideya na ang isip at katawan ay magkahiwalay o separated. In other words, lahat ng tao ay mayroong physical brain. So, but we also have a separate mind. Adding to this distinction, dualists have historically asserted the mind is the seat of our consciousness. On the contrary, the brain is really just an organ similar to the heart or lungs. Dahil ang pag-iisip ay seat of our consciousness o ang upa ng ating kamalayan. Ito yung nagbibigay sa atin ng ating pagkakakilanlan. Hindi man natin ito nakikita or natitikman o nahahawakan, but it does exist. Hindi lang ito umiiral, ngunit ito ang gumagawa sa ating sarili. Next is materialism. To this assertion, Paul Churchland has come along and pretty much said, I don't think so, tossing aside the concept of dualism and the brain. Churchland adheres to materialism o ang paniniwala na walang anuman kundi ang bagay na umiiral. So sa madaling salita, kung hindi ito maaaring makalala ng mga pandama o senses mo, in other words, if it can somehow to be recognized by the senses that it's akin to a fairy tale o isang kwentong bayan o sa madaling sabi, isa lamang siyang ilusyon. Wait lang po. Applying this argument to the mind, Churchland asserts that since that mind can be experienced by our sense, then the mind doesn't really exist. Based on this assertion, Churchland holds eliminative materialism. So nakasaad ng simple na nagtatalo na ang ordinaryong traditionally sorry po. Psikolohiya na isip ay mali. Ito ang pisikal na utak at ang hindi ang haka-haka ng isip na nagbibigay sa atin ng ating pakiramdam ng sarili. Next po, Patricia Churchland. Patricia Churchland, self according to philosophy. For decades, Patricia Churchland has contributed to the fields of philosophy of neuroscience, philosophy of the mind, and neuroethics. Ang kanyang pananaliksik ay nakasentro sa interface sa pagitan ng neuroscience at filosofiya na may kasalukuyang pagtuon sa samahan ng moralidad at utak ng lipunan. So according po sa kanya, the nature of mind and consciousness had been one of the biggest and trickiest issues in philosophy for our century. Ibig sabihin na ang kamalayan ay nagiging isa sa pinakamalaki at pinakamahirap na issue sa philosophy sa loob ng 100 siglo. Ganun po siya katagal. And neuroscience was developing fast, but most philosophers resisted claims that it was solving the philosophical problems of mind. Scientists who trod on philosophers' toes were accused of scientificism. The belief that the only true explanation are scientific explanation and that once you had described the science of phenomenon, there was nothing left to say. Ibig sabihin, ang paniniwala na ang tanging totoong nagpapaliwanag ay ang mga paliwanag ng science at sa sandaling nilalarawan mo daw ang science ng isang hindi pangkaraniwang bagay ay wala nang masabi. So those are philosophers like the Churchland who shared many of the enthusiasms and interests of the scientists, or even more. This piece, Voice in the Head of Patricia Churchland, told her how to deal with this often vicious critics like outlast the bastards. Yun lang po. Thank you.
So hi, I'm the last reporter. I hope you're still listening po. I will discuss about Maurice Ponty. So Maurice Ponty is a French philosopher and phenomenologist. So para mas malawakan tayo kung ibig sabihin nun, phenomenology ay isang philosophical na pag-aaral sa mga struktura ng karanasan at kamalayan. He took a very different approach to self and mind and body. So bakit nga ba magkakaiba ang approach ng mga ito? Dahil according to him, the division between the mind and body is a product of confused thinking. So sila yung kumikilos at gumagawa sa ating personalidad o ating sarili dahil ang self is experienced as a unity in which the mental and physical are seamlessly woven together. This unity is the primary experience of selves and begin to doubt it when individuals use their minds to contact abstract nations as separate mind and body. Develop the concept of self-subject and contented that perception occur existentially. Ibig sabihin, siya yung bumuo ng konseptong ito gamit ang kanyang kakayahan at kaalaman. Thus, the consciousness, the world, and the human body are all interconnected as mutually perceive the world. Meaning, lahat ng tao ay may kamalayan, walang taong wala nito sapagkat dito nakikita ang kamalayan ng isang tao. According to him, the world and the sense of self are emergent phenomena in the ongoing process of man becoming. Phenomenology provides a direct description of human experience which serves to guide man's conscious. Kagaya ng aking sinabi, na ang phenomenology ay isang philosophical na pag-aaral ng mga struktura at karanasan ng kamalayan. At para mas maunawaan pa natin ang phenomenology, ito ay isang pag-aaral ng esensya para mas maunawaan natin ang kamalayan nito. Mas maunawaan natin ang kamalayan nito. Dagdag pa dito na he further added that the world is a field of perception and human consciousness assigns meaning to the world. Thus, man cannot separate himself from his perceptions of the world. Perception is not purely the result of sensations, nor it purely interpretations. Rather, consciousness is a process that concludes sensing as well as interpreting or reasoning. Ilang po, maraming salamat.